father had Albert by the neck, picked him literally off the floor and was just shaking him like a rag doll.
Soon after that incident, Charlotte and Frank divorced. The family never saw Frank again. By the time Albert was 12, he was working odd jobs after school. He delivered flowers and shined shoes to make some pocket money. Most of all, he tried to make life easier on his sisters and brothers.
If we were sitting there, he'd say, "You want a Coke?" And then he'd know, looking at me, he'd know right away, a Coke isn't enough. You want a sandwich, a hot dog, you want a cake?
Before he was 13, Albert had a police record.
Albert had his first brush with the law in 1943. He committed assault and battery and robbery on a neighborhood paperboy. The take from that was $2.85.
The judge gave Albert a suspended sentence. Within weeks, he was arrested again for breaking and entering. He had stolen $24 worth of jewelry from a neighborhood house. This time, there was no slap on the wrist. Albert was thrown into a reform school, the Lyman School for Boys, where he spent a total of 2 years. It was a harsh and forbidding world, but even after he was let out, Albert's home environment wasn't much saner than reform school had been. Just as in his early childhood, 14-year-old Albert was graphically exposed to sexual promiscuity. This time it was his neighbors in the apartment building on Chelsea's Lower East Side.
Albert also complained. He says they had a couch on the roof, and the people living in this building would have girls there. And I'd come up and they'd say, "Here's a quarter, beat it." And he says, sex all the time, happening all the time.
The otherwise meek and impressionable teenager was beginning to show a sadistic side as well.
Albert himself would put dogs and cats in orange crates and let them scratch each other to death.
But Albert did not show any violence to those closest to him.
We had a little spat because I wanted to go with him somewhere, and he kept, denying me from going, and finally I grabbed him by the hair, and I wouldn't let go. I pulled out a piece of the scalp and all on it. And even at that point, he still, he just took it like a grain of salt. He was angry, but not enough to hit me or anything for it.
Albert's home life was not improving. So, at the age of 17, with only a junior high school diploma, Albert found a way out. He joined the Army. There, he developed a reputation for being obsessively neat. Albert completed his basic training at Fort Dix in New Jersey and was transferred to Germany in 1949. There, at a USO dance, he met a woman named Irmgard Beck. They fell in love.
Albert was passionately in love with Irmgard. He adored her. He treated her as if she were a goddess.
Albert and Irmgard were quickly married in the small town of Bad Kissingen, but the marriage ran into problems right away. Irmgard discovered that Albert had an abiding obsession with sex and an overpowering sex drive that he relieved by masturbating frequently.
She was said to have claimed that he wanted to make love 5 or 6 times a day, which clearly she did not have the time for, nor the inclination.
The only thing she ever said to me is that they did have sex, and then when she go to the bathroom, she'd find her dish towel or another towel with semen or something on it, and that upset her. Why, what's wrong with him that he should have sex with me and then have to go into the bathroom?
He said, "I have a burning feeling in my abdomen, flashes of burning, and it means I have to have sexual release of some kind."
In 1954, the young couple left Germany for America, where Albert's sexual problems soon caught up with him.
When Albert returned to the United States, to New Jersey, he had brushes with the law. The most serious one was an arrest in Mount Holly, New Jersey in January of 1955 for carnal abuse of a child.
The charges were dropped when the girl's mother decided the court proceedings would be too traumatic for the child. Albert decided it was a good time to leave town. In 1956, Albert, Irmgard, and their new baby daughter packed up and left New Jersey and the Army altogether. Their destination, Boston. Within years, Albert would begin his downward spiral into a psychotic world of sexual deviation and violence. At the age of 25, Albert DeSalvo was fighting an internal battle against his own monstrous sexual cravings, and he was losing. But he still strained to live the normal working-class life in Boston with his wife Irmgard and their baby girl.
He was very firm about the fact that he was a devoted husband and father. He never went out with the guys for a beer after work. He came straight home. He gave his entire pay packet to Irmgard. He was never one for a night out on the town.
Albert grabbed whatever job he could find, in a shoe factory, then in a shipyard, and finally as a construction worker. By 1960, Albert and Irmgard had their second child, a son. But Albert was restless.
He wanted to be something in life and just didn't have the background, training, education, experience, or the wherewithal to become anyone except a loudmouth, self-centered, egotistical braggart.
And a sexual predator. Albert had begun to prowl the streets of Cambridge searching for his prey. He invented a routine to con gullible young women, relying heavily on his ability to charm.
A man claiming to be a representative of a black and white modeling agency, he called himself Johnson, was appearing at the doors of various young women and saying, "You're lovely, you should be a model, may I take your measurements?"
That man was Albert DeSalvo.
He would then say that he was empowered to take their measurements to see if they would fit the photographer's needs, and that he was allowed to give $10 for just their measurements, or $15 in bra and pants, or $25 in the nude.
A surprising number of women went along with Albert's scheme. It was not uncommon for Albert to then talk his way into bed with the most trusting of his prey. But some of the women complained to the police. The cops started keeping a watch out for the con artist they called the Measuring Man. Meanwhile, Albert was branching out. He was fast becoming an expert at breaking and entering. And luck was on his side. Although he was arrested and charged with burglary several times, he always received a suspended sentence and walked out of court. Until March 17th, 1961. That night, Albert was caught while burglarizing a house on Broadway in Cambridge. DeSalvo had every reason to once again expect easy treatment at the hands of the law. But this time, he himself changed the rules. On the way back to the station house, Albert boasted to the police about his many sexual conquests, explaining in detail the unusual scheme he'd cooked up to con women as the Measuring Man.
I gave a fast line. I said, well, if you give me your measurements now, I'll have them stripped right down naked. And I told, look, if you really want to make out, I said, I'll come down myself first thing this afternoon, and I'll take care of you. I'll make sure that you get first prize.
The police were delighted with Albert's unsolicited confession. They arrested him for the Measuring Man assaults, and they threw the book at him, charging him with breaking and entering, assault and battery, and lewdness. But the judge softened the blow. He dropped the charge of lewdness and allowed DeSalvo to plead guilty only to the burglary and assault charges, an act of leniency that would have serious consequences later. To Albert, it didn't seem lenient at all. For the first time in his life, Albert had to go to prison, the Billerica House of Corrections. His sentence was just 11 months. In April 1962, Albert was once again a free man. It was 2 months later that the first victim of the Boston Strangler, Anna Slessors, was found dead. For the next 18 months, the Strangler's string of grisly murders terrorized Boston and the whole nation. But the police never suspected Albert DeSalvo. Because the judge had not charged him with sexual offenses for the Measuring Man crimes, Albert's name did not come up when the Strangler Task Force combed the police files for suspects. In fact, DeSalvo might never have been connected to the Boston stranglings at all if it hadn't been for his insatiable sexual appetite. In May of 1964, 5 months after the last known Boston strangling, Albert began a series of rapes in Massachusetts. These crimes would earn him yet another nickname, the Green Man.
The Green Man scheme was somewhat, well, considerably different from his Measuring Man gig. He got the name Green Man from the fact that he wore a workman's uniform.
He would drive somewhere, and the urge would be on him